but it basically evolved over time very slowly. And we kind of created all these unique birds that we have. And that's one of the things that really drew me into birds is there's so many different types. I mean, we have peregrine falcons that can fly 200 miles an hour. You've got kestrels and ospreys that can hover, hummingbirds that can fly backwards.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Tree Podcast, the show where we talk to great communicators about how they do what they do. This week we're speaking with Gene Groshon. Gene is a naturalist with the Natural Resources Division of the Calvert County Government Department of Parks and Recreation in Maryland. Within that role, he helps administer the MAPS program, which is a continent-wide bird banding effort organized by the Institute for Bird Populations. We've talked to Gene in the past about that particular program. Gene and his team not only tag and track birds in southern Maryland, but they also educate the public on the importance of birds in the global ecosystem. Again, we interviewed Gene last year, mostly about his background and about banding songbirds. But in this episode, we would like to shift our focus a little bit to him and his team's work with raptors, such as hawks, falcons, and owls. Gene, with that introduction, it's a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for coming back.
It's awesome to be back. I'm always happy to talk about birds.
Great. Well, we had such a great reception from the audience last time. I selfishly, I want you to have you back because I think you're an interesting guy, but we got such a great viewership of the last episode. I really wanted to build on that if we can today. And it just so happens it's great timing because I just joined you with a member of my family on a recent raptor banding trip. So as we talk about this, we'll probably be interspersing some pictures and video from that trip and really try to bring it alive for everybody.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, and we were there from morning till evening, and we just couldn't get enough. So
yeah, that's excellent.
That's a plug right off the top there. But like and that's kind of what I want to get into. When some people hear the word raptor, they probably think of Jurassic Park or something like that.
For sure.
And most people, I think by now, maybe even because of those movies, know that there's kind of like a tenuous relationship between birds and dinosaurs. But when we talk about raptors in the context of what you do, please talk a little bit about that and how it differs from the other work we talked about with songbirds.
Yeah. So most birds that people are familiar with are foraging for their food. They're looking for seeds, nuts, and plants. And really insects count too in that kind of realm. But when we're talking about raptors, they're birds of prey. So they're actually going out and capturing live food and subduing it and seizing their prey. So this could include hawks, owls, eagles, ospreys, falcons, and harriers, and even vultures, which even though they're eating dead animals, they are still evolved from raptors and are still considered raptors. But like you said, when you get, really close to these birds, whether you're watching them hunt in the wild or like when you guys came out for our banding project, you can really see up close how they are, distant relatives of dinosaurs with those long talons and the scaled legs and those really sharp beaks. So they're just a really neat bird to learn about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you hit the nail on the head when you kind of brush back those feathers and really look at those talons.
Yeah.
It's the apple doesn't fall far from the tree from dinosaurs. That's for sure. Well, Gene, one thing I've really always admired about what you do is how much joy you take in actually teaching and educating about birds in general. And at this last, we keep referring back to our recent trip with raptors in particular. Why do you think it's so important to teach and educate and above all, communicate about the importance of researching raptors in particular?
So I think birds are a great way that pull people into nature and get them involved. Even if folks just have a bird feeder outside their house, that's an immediate connection with nature. But since raptors aren't nearly as common as backyard birds, such as cardinals and chickadees, I feel like a lot of people don't know about the different types. People may know eagles and hawks and maybe owls, but they may not realize that there's many species of owls since they only come out at night and we rarely see them. And it's also very important to study raptors and learn about them because they can be good indicators of how our environment's doing. Since they're predators and they're at the top of the food chain, they can be very sensitive to changes in the amount of prey items they have or other changes in their habitat or the introduction of chemicals and pesticides can have a big effect and can really help alert us that there's a problem in the habitat.
Yeah, that's something you really brought it back to a lot when we were on our bird banding trip. Is how important it is, and how things shift. So there'll be from year to year, it seems like sometimes raptors and other birds will feed and mate and give birth to their offspring in different areas, kind of depending on to some extent on the climate. Also, food source is a big deal too.
Definitely. Yeah.
And some of that it's intertwined. So we'll get into that as we go here. But the last time you were here, you talked again about banding songbirds, and we kind of confined it to that and kind of other smaller bird species. But what if you could walk us through, and again, we'll provide some video here. What is the banding process like for raptors, and kind of how does that differ from banding smaller birds like songbirds?
Yeah. So when we're talking about raptors, they can be as small as this taxidermied American kestrel, which is about the size of a robin, or as large as this red-tailed hawk, which you guys will get to see some photos and videos of that we were able to capture. So that larger size is, it's a lot more to handle. Whereas when we're banding songbirds, we can typically hold them and can safely contain them in our hands. With these raptors, the red-tailed hawk can have a wingspan of up to 4.5 feet. So that's a big bird. So we like to use cans, such as these, where we'll tape cans together. So it's a long tube with holes in the bottom. And this way we can insert the bird into the can. We'll demonstrate with our taxidermy. So we can insert the bird into the can, and it safely contains the wings of the bird. It acts like a falconer's hood and keeps the bird in a dark area and helps keep it more calm. So this way we're able to access measuring the tail, the wings, and banding the legs while still keeping the bird safe and contained. A lot of people think, that they would be worried about getting bit by these birds. They do have big beaks, and it does not feel good when they bite you. But these birds are way more likely to want to shake your hand. And when you have a foot full of very sharp talons, these are not pleasant handshakes. I've had a red-shouldered hawk once get me 2 talons in the same thumb on either side, and it was probably the most painful thing in my life. I didn't let go of the bird, and we were still able to band it and release it, and luckily it didn't get infected. But you have to be very mindful and aware of their feet at all times. With the bands, they are very similar to our bird bands that we would use for songbirds. So for the American kestrel that I held up earlier, it would be this little band, which is just a small little loop of metal. This is called a butt end band because it butts together. And this has a 9-digit number on it, just like a social security number or a license plate number. It helps other researchers identify this bird. So that way, if somebody else captures this bird, they can read this number, report it back to the bird banding lab, and they'll get all the data that I submitted on the bird. And it will let them know where that bird was originally banded, and it will let me know that that bird was captured or found somewhere else. But for a lot of our bigger raptors, these bands won't work. Their bills are far too strong, and they're only made of aluminum, so they would be able to pull the bands apart. So for our bigger raptors, like red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks, we use what's called a lock-on band. These are a lot larger. It makes it a little bit easier for me, especially to read this number. But it has this special tab at the top. So we would open this band, slip it around the bird's leg. This would then get closed. And then this little tab right here would get folded over. So it really locks that band on there really tight. And we know it's going to stay safely on that bird for the rest of its life. But it's overall, after that, the process is pretty similar to our songbirds. We're measuring the length of their wing cord measurement, their tail measurement. We're looking closely at their tail feathers to look for any wear patterns or older or newer feathers and their wing feathers to help age that bird. So we can try and tell, was that bird born this year or last year, or was it maybe 2 years ago? With raptors, we are able to age them a little older than songbirds. Songbirds generally replace all of their feathers in 1 year, whereas larger raptors, such as the red-tailed hawk, they will replace their feathers slowly over time because they're much larger. It takes a lot longer to replace them. So a red-tailed hawk could have 3 different generations or ages of feathers at one time on its wing, and that would help us to know that that bird could be an after a third-year bird. helping us to age it just a little bit farther than saying it's an after hatch year bird as a songbird. Then we take some photos to help us with aging and noting any other differences that we might have seen. And then we release the bird right there on site. The whole process can take about 20 to about 20 minutes, sometimes even less, depending on how cooperative the bird is.
Yeah, and we learned the hard way. Some of the longest part of it is waiting for them to
certainly
kind of come close
testing
enough.
Your patience.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
You make it a lot of fun. So I shameless plug. Everyone needs to join Gene. It's a lot of fun on your trips.
Yeah, I've never had somebody that came out and said, "Wow, that was boring." Like,
right. I can even imagine you. There's probably been instances where you don't catch anything, but you're still taking in data. You're still kind of because part of what was so interesting on this particular trip was even if we weren't seeing birds, you were giving us a history of where you'd seen birds before, and kind of like giving us kind of talking out your thought process as to kind of what locations you were scouting, which was very, very interesting. Kept it really fresh and interesting. The whole time.
It's a fun process.
Well, kind of building on the process of banding, Gene, you've mentioned before how you band raptors mostly in the wintertime. If you could talk about why that is and, do the kind of sleeping and eating patterns and maybe even mating patterns. I'm not sure of I guess all raptors, particularly I seem to remember you talking about owls in particular, but maybe all raptors. Do those kind of patterns vary more in the wintertime, and kind of give us some insight into how that works?
Yeah. So what really got me started in focusing on a winter research project is I was studying American kestrels, putting up nest boxes for them in our area here in Calvert County, Maryland. And we had very few breeding success. We had very few pairs here in the summer, but I noticed in the winter, we had a lot more. So I wanted to start studying the American kestrels on their wintering ground and hoping to learn where they're breeding and why they aren't staying here and why they're going somewhere else. It also makes it a lot easier to capture the birds in the winter. And I'll talk about that next with our process of banding, but it's very food motivated. And in the summertime, there's lots of other food items out there for the raptors to eat. But in the winter, as insects start hibernating, some birds will start migrating away that could be food sources, and a lot of the mammals are a lot less active. So that'll really change the behaviors of these birds that maybe are more in the forest or swamp areas during their breeding seasons during the spring and summer. And in the winter, it moves them out to the open meadows, which one makes it easier for us to see, but it helps them to be able to find small rodents and stuff easier. So when we're banding songbirds, it's more of a passive type of banding where we're putting up a large mist net in ideal habitat, such as forest or meadow. And we're hoping that the birds just flying along their way end up in the net. We then extract the birds from the net and go through the banding process. With the raptors, it's a much more targeted process. We're driving around Calvert County and looking for different raptors, which we'll actually record then, even if we just see them and we don't capture it. I can use that data to compare with surveys that my volunteers are also doing to see if we're seeing an increase or decrease in numbers throughout different years. But once we see a bird, we're going to put out what's called a velociraptor trap. And this is one here that I have made. Velociraptors basically translated to hair umbrella, which sounds really strange. But back in the late 1800s, falconers were making velociraptor traps out of bamboo, and they kind of looked like a dome umbrella. And for the little loops or the nooses to catch their feet, they were making them out of horsehair. So that's where the term of hair umbrella came from. Probably wouldn't be too effective against rain, though.
Probably not.
But more modern velociraptor traps are made of hardware cloth, which is a thick metal screen. We put weights along the bottom edge. There's a small door here in the bottom that allows us to put a live mouse inside. And then it has these little monofilament fishing line loops on the top. So we'll place the mouse inside, place the trap out at the edge of the field, and then back our van up and watch from a pretty close distance. Hopefully, the bird will see our trap and the mouse and not be too skeptical of it. And when it comes in to try and catch it, it will hopefully get one of its legs through one of these loops and get caught. Then we'll come up with the van, we'll extract the bird and start the banding process at the back of our van, which has kind of been outfitted as a little banding station. These traps are all specifically sized for the different species. This one is for red-shouldered hawks. Our red-tailed hawk trap, which is a bigger hawk species, is a slightly larger trap with larger diameter loops since they have larger feet. And then for American kestrels, our trap is a lot smaller and uses much smaller loops that are only about that big around. The weight of the monofilament also changes. For a very small bird, we need a very fine monofilament, such as like 3 to 8 pound test. So it's much easier for the bird to close it versus a very thick loop like this. But it's definitely a lot of fun. And it reminds me of the cartoon Roadrunner and Coyote, kind of like with the traps of trying to catch the birds. But luckily, we are quite a bit more successful than the coyote was. That's
right. And lest anyone thinks, that cinch is really tight. I witnessed it myself. The birds are not hurt at this process at all. If anything, it's like they've gotten snagged on a weed or something. That's probably what they're thinking in their mind.
Yeah. So when we do this, I've worked with a lot of different banders over time to be able to get my bird banders permit through the BBL, Bird Banding Laboratory, which is part of the United States Geological Service. They're based out of Laurel, Maryland. So my permit allows me to band American kestrels, red-shouldered hawks, red-tailed hawks, and also a variety of species of owls too. So by working with other banders, I was able to learn these techniques, learn the proper handling techniques, how to build the traps appropriately sized, because we care just as much about the birds as most other people do, if not more. So we also want to make sure these birds are being as safe as possible and not getting injured. So that way, when they're released, they are continuing on in this research project as they would have we not intervened.
And what I was struck by with all that is how once they are trapped, and you do a really good job of kind of comforting them, and you get them in hand, they become I don't want to say docile, but I would have thought just off the top of my head that they would become very violent or something, right, trying to escape, but they actually don't. I don't know if you just have a way with birds, but there at no point did the bird seem in danger. I was really interested in that.
Yeah. So the main thing when you're holding a raptor, so when you're holding a songbird, we usually hold the whole body of the bird, almost like with this kestrel like this. But when we're holding a raptor, we're holding it by the base of the legs. So if I was holding this bird, I would have my hand way up here against the body, holding the legs as close to the body as possible. That way, the bird is being held pretty well, so it can't escape or fall out. Those talons can't get me. And it's a very supportive spot on the bird. The legs right there are very strong, and it's not putting a lot of pressure on them. Sometimes we do get some feisty birds. We've had a red-shouldered hawk that just called nonstop while it was out of the can, and it like made your eardrums rattle.
Wow.
Some kestrels I will hold in the bander's grip, like we do at songbirds, and they can sometimes get that little beak and get you with their talons. And one thing I forgot to mention with American kestrels is we're using a special band with them. We are now using a field-readable color band that has a 3-digit, so this is AA4, and this allows the band, hopefully, to be a little bit more visible than that really tiny metal band that has a 9-digit number that wraps around. Unfortunately, we haven't had any of our birds that have been sighted with these bands yet, but we're really hoping that somebody in our area sees one of these birds with the bands and we can see it's returning to its wintering ground, or somewhere up on its breeding ground, and we can learn where these birds are breeding. But even with the wintering ground, it's still very important. Some of these birds we're seeing are returning year after year. And if a lot of times when studying birds, you feel like the breeding ground is the most important area because that's where the production is happening. That's where the new generation is being created. But if these birds aren't able to survive on their wintering grounds, they may not make it back to their breeding grounds to keep producing.
And that's interesting you say that, because part of part of as we're kind of looking for different birds, but one thing that came up a few times is the community that's kind of built around that process. So you're able to, if you spot a bird that's banded and you didn't do it, or maybe you did do it. I mean, either way,
Yeah.
you can look in a database and look up that number, and you can, verify that, yeah, it's one I banded versus, I think you've said you've even had them from as far away as like New Jersey and stuff.
Yeah.
Who've come down. And that's so interesting, that the data collection process of that.
Yeah, it's always really exciting to recapture a bird, even if it's my own bird. I've recaptured a couple of American kestrels and red-tailed hawks, and all of them have been within 500 feet of where I originally banded them. And that was sometimes multiple years in between when I originally banded that bird. So that really shows these birds are coming back to the exact same wintering grounds year after year. And the bird that I captured from New Jersey was a really great one. I was so excited, and I kept reading the number, and I was like, I kept rereading the number thinking it was my bird, and I was just reading it wrong. And my wife was like, no, Gene, that's another bird. That's from another bander. Wow. And it was very exciting to find out that bird was from Flemington, New Jersey, and it was about 170 miles away. And it was the first time that bander had ever had one of their birds recaptured alive. Unfortunately, sometimes these birds are found dead and people still see the band, and you can report that. It'll actually have the phone number or the website right on the band itself. So this bander was very excited to find out one of their birds had survived and was wintering down in Maryland. And they told me they had banded it in the nest box before it had made its first flight. And I was actually able to go on the Google Maps and go to Street View and look around, and I could actually see the nest box where that bird was banded.
Oh, wow.
So it was neat to kind of take a little look into where that bird was originally from.
Wow, how cool. Well, and we've kind of been hinting at it, but you kind of alluded to the process of how these raptors can hunt and kind of gather food, and that's so important to this process. So the word raptor, as I understand it, actually comes from the Latin to grasp or seize.
Yep.
And you've talked a good deal about those really sharp talons. So can you tell us a little bit about how they, in this case, they don't actually capture prey because it's just a mouse in a cage, so they can't get in there. But when they're out in nature, how do they actually capture their prey and consume it, maybe differently from other birds, and kind of what senses do they rely on to do that?
Yeah. So with raptors, like we talked about, it's their feet. I actually have a few taxidermied feet here. So this is the foot of a red-tailed hawk. So you can see that is a pretty large foot. This one actually is pretty tiny compared to the one that we captured. That one had some very large feet on it. That was a larger bird. Yeah. But when you're looking at it, this is basically the world's perfect mousetrap. This is actually the foot of a barred owl. So when you're looking at it, it is just a mess of talons coming from all directions. So as the bird is flying in, it's going to open these talons and wrap those talons around its prey. And the feet are extremely strong, as I found out when that one got my thumb.
Right.
So when they grab a prey item, they are holding onto it very tight and squeezing it until that prey is subdued. A lot like how a snake will wrap around its prey and constrict its prey to be able to subdue its prey. But with owls, they actually have a special feature, and ospreys have this too. They have semizygodactyl feet where this outer toe can actually pivot around and go to the back. And sometimes they can make it where their toes are almost like a cross. That gives them a little better grip and chance of capturing that prey. Ospreys also have another feature where the scales on the bottom of their feet are actually very rough and almost like little spikes. Since they're mostly feeding on fish, it allows them to help hold on to more slippery prey. But when we're talking about their senses, most raptors are out during the daytime. Hawks, falcons, eagles, even some species of owls. And they're going to be relying on their sight. Raptors have amazing abilities to sense movement from very long distances. American kestrels, which again are only about the size of a robin or a mourning dove, can spot a grasshopper about a few inches long from over a football field away. So that's over 100 yards, and it can see a little 2-inch grasshopper land in the grass. And falcons also have a really unique adaptation where they have two focal points. So as humans, we just have our focal points on the backs of our eyes. With birds of prey having their eyes, they can see in front of them as binocular vision, but also to the sides. And falcons have focal points on the insides of their eyes that allow them so they can focus on things that are directly in front of them, and at the same time be able to focus on specific things that are to the left and their right, which is really hard to comprehend what that almost like 180-degree view would look like to us. It would probably be pretty overwhelming. But when we talk about birds that are more active at night, they still rely on sight. Owls in particular have very special eyes that allow them to see a little bit better in the darkness. So we have two different visual cells in our eyes, rods and cones. Rods allow us to see contrast, and cones help us to see color. Since owls are more active at night and they're not needing to worry about colors since it's very dark out, they will have more rods in their eyes and cones to help focus on that difference in light contrast that helps them to see movement. But they mostly rely on their excellent hearing. Some owls have been able to capture prey that is under leaves or under snow without seeing their prey at all. And some owl species have their ears a little bit asymmetrical. One is a little higher than the other. And that allows them to be able to pinpoint a sound exactly where it's coming from without even seeing it. Very similar to how your pet cat or dog may hear a sound and will turn its head to the side to try and figure out where that sound is coming from. But it really is. It's really amazing how raptors are able to hunt and capture their prey. And I think that's part of what has really created my interest in them over songbirds.
I want to talk about the importance of raptors to the ecosystem in a minute, but it might help the audience to zoom out a little bit and just talk about just the geography for a minute. We're in Calvert County. That's where you work. And in this case with raptors, we're kind of going around in a van to different areas in Calvert County that you're familiar with, where it's most likely these will be spotted. It's quite close to the Chesapeake Bay, and it's also very close to kind of some tributaries and some rivers. So could you kind of just give us a lay of the land, just to kind of paint a picture for people of the ground you cover when you do these raptor bandings?
Sure. So when we're out looking for birds, we're mostly traveling back roads. It makes it a little easier for us with less traffic. It doesn't startle the bird if it comes down to the trap. And there's usually a bigger shoulder for us to be able to pull off on and to be able to conduct our banding process. So really birds, these raptors could be almost anywhere, but we're mostly focusing on more open areas of habitat. Farms are excellent areas, especially this time of year. Most of them don't have a crop, or they'll either have a very short crop. Most farms in our area grow corn and soybean, which is a very tall product, and it's not very good for raptors to hunt over. One, there's not going to be a lot of pests there, such as insects or rodents, which we'll talk about later. And also the plants are just too tall for them to be able to hunt over. So we're basically driving around these open areas, looking along tree lines and along meadows for fields, birds perched in the trees, possibly on the power lines. But some of the birds we find could even be in people's yards. So we're generally just placing the trap along the edge of the road, so we're still in the right of way, and trying to lure these birds out away from their hiding spots along the edges to come down and be a part of science.
Donate their time to science.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you do a really good job of trying to stay in kind of public areas. There's obviously it's tempting to kind of go onto people's property if you see a really great bird, but yeah, you're really good about kind of really respecting everyone's property. And
for sure, I don't want to make somebody mad and then jeopardize the chance of being able to run this program or teach others. And sometimes when we've captured birds, the public have been nearby and get really interested in it. I have had other times where somebody pulled up to see why I pulled in this one driveway, and I literally had a hawk in my hand. And
You're like,
I was just like, oh, I'm just studying birds. He was like, oh, okay. And then he left. So I guess, not everybody is in the birds, but most people, when they see you holding a hawk, they are, you've got their attention.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there was an instance where, and you had referred to this humongous hawk that you ended up banding. And I had kind of like a secret hope that these people who were kind of nearby would stay, just for the thrill of
Yep.
me sharing it vicariously, because I was just observing. My family member and I were just observing the whole time. That's something else I think is important to mention. Is you do all the heavy lifting, you do all the measuring and the capturing, and really. But that said, when the like in my instance. You really involve people like me in actually spotting the raptors, and I thought something kind of connected to the winter kind of dynamic of this is that most of the leaves are off the tree, so they're a little bit probably easier to spot.
For sure.
During the winter as well.
Yeah.
So you really feel as a kind of along for the ride kind of person, I really actually felt very involved in the process, just helping to spot them. So
yeah. And so we do this project too with, I have gotten teens involved. So I take teens out in a very similar way where they're looking for the birds, and we're learning a lot about raptors, and they get to see the banding process, hoping to, plant that seed that this is something they really enjoy, and it'll help promote, more people protecting these animals. And a lot of times they see the birds first. Especially with me driving, knowing where to go, it's very difficult to be able to look for birds and also safely drive. So I'm relying on everybody else to be kind of looking around in all directions to help spot our next partner in science.
Absolutely. That said, though, I was impressed how you found some birds that I would have never found ever, and you were driving. So
yeah, I've been doing it for a little while, and you kind of learn what to look for, learn that shape, or you start to learn very common spots where the birds will be perched. Certain farms, I know exactly which power line poles or peaks of barns to check. So you just kind of start learning the birds' patterns.
Absolutely. Well, and on that topic of the birds' patterns, can you talk a little bit about why raptors are so important to the ecosystem and kind of the overall food web? How do they fit within that?
Yeah, so raptors are at the top of the food chain. So they are very great in helping control other animal populations. If smaller populations get too high, it could throw the whole food web out of balance to where maybe these rodents start devastating the plant life there, and then the rodents die off. And if the plants aren't there, it's not going to support the raptors. So it's all really about checks and balances with food webs. And also helping to remove and keep those populations in check helps reduce diseases. Mice are a big one that transfer ticks around and help spread ticks, and unfortunately spread diseases such as Lyme's disease and alpha-gal. I have alpha-gal, which is an allergy to red meat. So I am very thankful of every raptor that devours a mouse and hopefully removes a few ticks from our local population.
Well, we're talking about how raptors help mitigate threats from other animals like mice. But what about the threats facing raptors themselves? So whether it's natural, human-made, what are some of the biggest threats facing raptor birds today, and how can they be protected?
Mm-hmm. So it's tough. So with raptors, their food, a lot of it is animals that humans consider pests. Insects that may be eating plants, rodents that could be eating grain on farm or getting into your house. And unfortunately, it's very common today to use a lot of rodenticides or insecticides, which are chemicals designed to kill those pests, those animals. But a lot of times we forget that those are important food for a lot of other animals. And unfortunately, sometimes these pesticides become less effective and they don't actually kill those animals, but that chemical is still inside those animals. So as raptors are eating these small little contaminated food items, those chemicals can build up inside of that raptor, which we call bioaccumulation. Just from eating lots of little bits of chemicals, those chemicals could reach a toxic level for that bird and ultimately kill it. We're trying to help promote other ways of reducing pests and using snap traps or live traps, or just reducing what's drawing those animals in or sealing up cracks in your house. Just because those rodenticides can be very deadly for raptors. A lot of rehabbers have seen a lot of issues with that because it's basically blood poisoning to those birds of prey. But also habitat loss is a very big one. Our population is always growing. We need places to live and shop. And unfortunately, to make those, sometimes we have to take away habitat from raptors, especially large tracts of forests and large meadows. Some raptors can adapt well to humans, especially red-shouldered hawks. They can be able to survive in habitats where there's suburban environments. Peregrine falcons, which are typically a cliff-dwelling species, can be found regularly in cities, feeding on pigeons, rodents, and other bird species. Just up north in Baltimore, they have a building on Light Street that has a peregrine family that's lived there for many years now. But some raptors can adapt. They need those very large tracts of forest, such as American goshawks or American kestrels, really need lots of meadows, and also northern hareers, which are mostly hunting over marshes and meadows. So without that habitat, it's getting harder and harder for them to either find wintering grounds or breeding grounds. And another big one that's not just for raptors, but for all birds is windows. Unfortunately, windows to us, we can determine that a window is a barrier and that we can see what's inside the window and ignore the reflection. But to birds, all they're really seeing is what's reflected around the outside of that window, which can typically be the sky, trees, or bushes. So to them, it just looks like more habitat or area they can fly. And when birds, even as small as songbirds, fly into the windows, it can cause effects with their migration, which a lot of studies are starting to look at now. Because some birds may die when they hit the window, others may fly off, but the researchers are wondering, are those causing long-term effects that we're not seeing because the birds are just flying off and possibly dying elsewhere or not able to migrate to their sites? So an easy way to kind of adjust your windows is things inside of your windows, such as blinds and stickers, won't really help. They really need to be on the outside. They make very special films that are like a clear tint that will have vertical stripes or little dots. Our nature center actually has several different types demonstrated on it. And those dots or stripes help to break up those reflections and help show that birds that this is not just a sky. This is really just a tunnel painted on the side of a wall that they should not fly into. But there is a lot of challenges out there. Some of them could even be natural. Cooper's hawks, for instance, are possibly increasing their populations in areas and chasing out American kestrels from their habitat. So sometimes it's not always a simple solution for these problems.
And, you talked about birds are maybe injured, like they run into windows or sick, but with the bioaccumulation. So, and a little bit earlier, you had talked about people finding dead birds, but still being able to, identify or, at least enter them into a database because of how they're banded. So with all that in mind, what should members of our audience do if they happen to find a dead raptor bird nearby or in their yard? What steps would you recommend?
So it's very important to know that avian flu is starting to increase in cases throughout the United States. So if you do have to handle an injured bird, I would suggest wearing rubber gloves and definitely washing up afterwards. A lot of times it may not be obvious that bird is sick. Now, if it's injured or if it's possibly sick, the best thing to do is to contact a wildlife rehabilitator. Sometimes you can search your local county's or state's website, such as Maryland DNR lists different wildlife rehabilitators that are in different counties. You want to find a rehabber that is permitted and specialized to handle birds. And a lot of times they might have staff or volunteers that they can send out to be able to help capture that bird. We work a lot with Owl Moon Raptor Center in Montgomery County, Maryland. And we have volunteers that work with us or live in Calvert County that will go out to capture birds and help transfer them up to Owl Moon. So even if you were to call Owl Moon, they would be able to reach out to volunteers throughout the state that might be nearby to help capture that bird. If by chance you had to capture that bird, you would want to do so very carefully. Usually the best way is putting a towel over the bird so you can wrap the bird up and then you can place the bird in a cardboard box. And it's very important to let the rehabber know where this bird was found So that way, if they're able to release it, they want to release it as close to where it was. So that way it can reestablish itself at its territories and also not be released in an area where there might be more of that same species, and then it would have to compete against them.
And we will put information about just what you're talking about in the show notes. And you mentioned the Nature Center earlier. We'll put information about that in case anyone happens to be in Calvert County and wants to visit you all. You all just did a nice rehab on the Nature Center, and we visited there this past weekend. It's beautiful. So we'll put all that in the show notes. But bring it back to dinosaurs now. Somebody on my crack team of researchers, which is my family, is wondering if raptors evolved specifically from the kind of like velociraptors we see in Jurassic Park, and if not, where did they evolve those amazing beaks and claws that again are kind of evident in something like Jurassic Park?
Most scientists agree that Archaeopteryx was the very first bird-like dinosaur. And fossil records show that it very likely had feathers on its wings. And scientists believe feathers evolved from the scales of reptiles. There's a lot of belief that at first it didn't just go from a spiky scale to a feather to fly, but they believe over time the scales evolved to be able to provide better camouflage, or maybe better cooling, or maybe to be used for behaviors to help be able to move the scales to make the animal appear bigger. And over time, these bird-like dinosaurs were able to fly with their feathers. So once we started having that, then we started seeing little splits in their genetics and just how they evolved, and based mostly on what they eat or how they survived. So our smaller songbirds that ended up eating seeds and fruits, they didn't need those really long talons or those really sharp curved beaks. So those features kind of faded away because it takes a lot of nutrition to be able to grow those really long structures. And raptors that were eating still alive animals kind of retained those features. They have scaled legs, so that way it helps protect their legs in case the prey they're trying to get tries to bite back. Some raptors will actually have feathered legs to give them even more armor. But it basically evolved over time very slowly. And we kind of created all these unique birds that we have. And that's one of the things that really drew me into birds is there's so many different types. I mean, we have peregrine falcons that can fly 200 miles an hour. You've got kestrels and ospreys that can hover, hummingbirds that can fly backwards. And it's just really amazing. Through modern genetic works or research, they started learning that falcons were always believed to be closely related to hawks because they all feed on live prey. But studies show that they were actually more closely genetically related to parrots than they were hawks. They have very curved beaks, and falcons actually have a special tip on their beak called a tomial tooth, which they use to actually sever the spinal cord at the base of their skull, at their prey's skull, which is a unique feature that hawks and eagles do not have. And they believe that was a feature that maybe carried over from parrots, and maybe they use something similar to crack open fruits and nuts. But as falcons kept evolving farther away from parrots, they ended up kind of coming back and converging and evolving closely to hawks, and they still appear very similar. Even in modern day times, snail kites, they found some unique evolution going on with them. They're a raptor that lives in southern United States and has a very curved bill that allows them to be able to extract snails out of their shell and to be able to crack them open. An invasive species of apple snail was introduced in the area and started becoming way more common than the native snails. These apple snails were larger, and scientists started noticing that after many years, the beaks of these snail kites were becoming larger. And they learned that the birds that had these larger beaks were able to survive and produce better on these invasive snails. So that genetic trait was passed on, and eventually most of the snail kites had these larger bills. So it's really neat to be able to see the process, going on in modern day times and not having to just look back at it and kind of theorize how it happened with dinosaurs.
You think of evolution as happening over like millions of years, but but it sounds like this was a much more condensed time period for their.
So it was a very small change. I don't know what the measurements were in the beak size, but it was enough to notice. And that's sometimes why we take measurements that during this process that we may not use to age the bird, but it could be used by another researcher that's able to access the data.
All the future scientists that I know before you were on today, you were teaching kindergartners.
Yep. So hopefully one
maybe
day someday some of doing this.
Some of your data will inform their work someday.
Yeah, that would be really neat.
Oh, you talked about parrots there, and there's other, other kind of interesting birds from all over the world. So if you were to, we'll end on this question because I want to put you on the spot here. If you were to observe or band any bird in the world, maybe one you haven't seen, or maybe one you have but you haven't yet banded, what would it be? If you had a crystal ball and you can make it happen, and if you haven't seen, if it's a kind that you haven't seen, do you plan on actually traveling to one day either band it or observe it?
Yeah. So anytime I travel, I'm always looking, for new bird species, but I try to make it, I'm trying not to chase certain species because I just want it to happen. So that way, if I come up short and I don't see the bird, I didn't waste all this time running around the desert like a madman. Right. So I like to think, if I'm meant to see the bird, I'll see the bird. But honestly, I wouldn't pass up any chance to band any raptor. Raptors have always just been very special to me, and I enjoy their special features and just their raw power and that demeanor they have. I mean, they almost kind of have like a menacing look to them, almost like dinosaurs. For instance, Aplomado falcons are a species that's found in Southwest United States. They're always a neat falcon that I really enjoyed. There's collared falconets, which are in Southeast Asia. Not sure if I'll ever make it to be able to see those. But they're a really just cool looking falcon that's very tiny, and their face almost looks like a panda. Swainson hawks are also another very pretty one that have a neat faded pattern under their wings. But yeah, any chance I could band another raptor, I'd love to. And it's not just fun seeing those birds up close and in hand, but just getting to share stories. I got to work with a bander in Wisconsin. And just getting to share some of his stories of his research over the year was a lot of fun. It's just you kind of form this camaraderie, and it's just neat kind of being part of the team. But I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of birds out there I would really love to band. Kingfishers are one that's always fascinated me. The fact that they can, fly just like any other bird, but they can dive underwater and swim a little bit, and they can also burrow through cliffs to be able to make their nests. They kind of conquered almost all elements of the natural world. Ravens, I think, would be another one that would be very interesting to band. I've always enjoyed the intelligence level of ravens and crows and other corvids, but I've heard they're pretty bitey, and they can also be quite a handful to band. But yeah, hopefully I'll be able to travel out and see some more birds. I was able to go to Ireland, and it was fun getting to see so many new species. That's part of what's awesome about going to a new area is it's all new to me. You almost have this like childlike wonder where everything around you is new and fresh. So it just kind of rejuvenates your interest in those things.
Well, that's a really good place to leave it. You gave us kind of the spectrum of all the birds that are out there, and you kind of left us wanting more. So hopefully you can come back and update us on if you've seen any of those kind of more exotic species next time. And thank you so much for joining us, Gene. How can the audience get in touch with you? And again, we'll keep some of your information. We'll put it in the show notes. But how can they best get in touch with you or your team if they're interested in either volunteering or just learning more about birding?
Yeah, thanks again for having me, because I love getting to share this. My passion with birds, it's really very clear to see that I love doing this and studying birds and sharing it with others. Within the show notes, I'll share my email address and a few of our websites. CalvertParks.org has a lot of our programs in it. And we also have our volunteer program called Calvert Stewards, where you can help out by doing some of these raptor surveys, driving around through Calvert County, looking for these birds. And we have lots of other opportunities that involve studying plants, helping out with the different parks. But it's really fun being able to get outside. It's very refreshing. And it's just great getting people involved in the outdoors.
And I'll make one last pitch for the banding, whether it's songbirds and or raptor banding. What's so great, in addition to all the stuff we talked about today, is Gene is also very well versed. He'll be modest and say it's not his area, but he's very well versed in plant life, the trees, the natural world. I mean, we were on a hike after we did our raptor banding this past weekend, and here's Gene talking about some salamanders, are dormant this time of year, whereas other ones are breeding, and so his knowledge, his voluminous knowledge, is not just confined to birds. So I really want to encourage anyone listening to join Gene and his team. It's you really won't regret it. So thank you so much, Gene. Really appreciate your time.